Have you ever been to an insane asylum? I don't mean some mental health clinic or therapy group. I'm talking full blown, one flew out of the cuckoo's nest type of establishment. Sitting out in the woods or up on a mountain, big old gate around it built like a castle. See them in horror movies? No? Well, you don't see them for a reason. About 70 years ago, back in the 50s and 60s, the United States deinstitutionalized. What does that mean? That means that the United States had taken the previously existing mental health institutions and psychiatric hospitals and shut them down through a series of policies and regulations released over the next 2 decades, starting in the 1950s. Well, why did that happen? We'll talk about it. We're actually going to talk about three really big important things with one center focus. Center focus, mental health in America. That's huge. That's a huge issue, right? We're all going through something, and a lot of people are going through a lot more. So what do we need to do? We need to simplify it. We need to recognize the connection between the mental health crisis that exists and the deinstitutionalization that we did. We have to answer three questions. First, we need to understand why that happened. Where did institutionalization even come from? Why was it deinstitutionalized? And what did they do after that? So that we can get to today. How does mental health look at on the streets? How does it look at out of hospital? And what are we going to do about it? What is being done about it? Can we do anything about this? Well, first understanding that in the 1800s, it was recognized that mental health disorders, diseases, from schizophrenia to ADHD and autism, for the next hundreds of years until the modern day and every ticking second, we understood that mental health exists. Much like physical health, where you can break your leg or you're born with a congenital disorder that doesn't allow for your immune system to work properly, mental health can be a neurologic or psychological issue that can have physiological effects on your body. Recognizing and understanding that that was normal, started to exist in the 1800s. Series of doctors and scientists established psychiatric hospitals to separate these individuals from the regular people in the population so that they could address their needs. This was actually a huge step. This was a huge step in understanding mental health. And then it grew. And then those 5 to 10 to 20,000 patients grew to hundreds of thousands. And for the next 100 years, the United States grew and grew and grew, and its population of individuals that needed psychiatric care grew and grew and grew, especially as we started to recognize more and more mental health diseases. Now, why did it get shut down? Understanding why it got shut down means understand what was happening when it was existing. As this population grew, the beds filled up and the psychiatric hospitals filled, they realized they can make a lot of money. And they could also perform a lot of experiments and procedures that they had never previously done because they now have a patient that can consent. It's implied because they're altered. Their mental status is consistently altered, so their consent is implied, which allowed for them to engage in experimental surgeries and procedures. This was obviously very inhumane and, in the government's eyes, very cost ineffective. They were spending millions of taxpayer dollars on these institutions that were hated by the American taxpayers. So they got rid of them. What did they do in response? Community outreach? As good as it was in the 1950s and 60s, they tried to set up through press and print as much community outreach programs and mental health availabilities in hospitals that were already pre-existing, switching rooms into psych wards that were existent on hospitals so that all clinics could have some level of access to healthcare needed for those that were having mental health crises. That was the response. And what was instilled through regulation and policy to be made to back it up. Not much funding, not much allocation, not much bounce back, kind of a take and forget. So, how does that affect us now? Well, now, how do we look at mental health? We look at mental health everywhere: social media, the TV, see it maybe with our friends, with our families, with our kids. We also see it a lot on our streets. Homelessness in America is an epidemic within itself. Combined with the epidemic that exists as mental health, we have 30% of the homeless population existing with severe mental health issues. Not ADHD, autism, bipolar disorder, severe schizophrenia disorders, severe multi-personality disorders, or bipolarity disorders. Out on the streets without any help. The populations that fell through the cracks, that didn't have the money to support the expensive healthcare system that already exists in the United States, fell through the cracks, lived on the streets, and it perpetuated continuous generations of homelessness and mental health issues, depending on if an issue is genetic or if it's psychological, based off of societal issues or emotional issues. All of these factors compound when you add homelessness into the mix. Why does this matter? Well, this matters because it's all around us. And it also matters because right now, the most protected groups are the ones being impacted the most. Disproportionately are veterans, people of color, single parents, more likely to become homeless. So now, us and a lot of other countries that have deinstitutionalized are dealing with a mess that we created. It was a solution, but now we have these new problems. So, is mental health causing homelessness, or is homelessness causing mental health? Yes to neither. Mental health can't really cause homelessness. At least there's not evidence right now proving so. Homelessness can definitely cause mental health crises, but it does not necessarily influence somebody's ability to get out of homelessness. And it also does not influence someone's ability to become susceptible to substance or alcohol abuse. So, what can we do? How do we move forward? What is expected? Government's already talked. We're not bringing back institutions, not to the level that we had, as we probably shouldn't. They were very inhumane. So what do they do instead? They expect us to continue our community outreach programs that exist and to continue to educate. It is up to us to educate. We need to educate ourselves. We need to educate others. We need to recognize that mental health crisis is the same as any other health crisis. You have somebody who has diabetes, and we recognize as a society that that person needs insulin. We recognize that somebody with asthma needs their inhaler. We need to recognize some baseline mental health and behavioral health diagnosis to understand what people might be going through so that we can give the correct potential social or verbal interventions or medical interventions that may be necessary. Second to all of this is the bureaucratic and political movements that could happen. We can all vote. If you're above the age of 18, we can all vote. And you can hopefully effectively vote towards policies that will help our country address mental health better. But in reality, what you can do other than vote and advocate and educate is to look out for those around you. I mean by that is to recognize that sometimes the best thing you can do is just provide support for somebody. So with institutions gone, we now know that we have people in this country, children, adults, veterans, single parents, people of color, that need assistance, that need help, that need housing. What are you going to do about it?